have not, the ones that are the most distinctive, these were people that became friends of mine afterwards, and they were professionals, and they were in some cases very well respected in their field, and they didn't want their story to come out because they're dealing with areas of responsibility, and they didn't want to risk any kind of damage to their reputation. And we've got people that are celebrities, from different countries, people that are fairly well known, abroad, internationally, and also within their own country that use it anonymously, because in some cases what they're using it for is something that they might feel, I don't,
Embarrassed by,
well,
or
sure, and
yeah.
I can see that, in many cases. Sometimes it would be nice if, if the soap opera star, would come out and just say yeah, it's okay, I'm using this stuff and I like it, but it's their prerogative. I mean, if they want to report it, they want to report it. If they don't, they don't. So that's fine.
It's interesting. One thing I find interesting about you seem to have this let's learn together, let's try and work with this technology, even though I'm putting it on the table, but let's try and come to consensus and put our thoughts and try and figure this thing out together. Um, and I've come across some scientific researchers, and they're very, some of them have God complexes. I'm not saying all of them do, or they're greedy. They have their ego. Um, they're controlled by their ego or their lust for money or power. I mean, why do you choose to have this kind of, I guess this is for lack of a better word, but I'm just going to call it like a learning together approach instead of going down the other way where you can, you know,
That's a really good question.
yeah.
I don't know if I could give you a single answer, and I don't know if I could give you a simple answer, but if I were to make the attempt, I would say that, in a nutshell, if we don't take that approach, and if we don't take that approach now, we're not going to make it as a species.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was Buckminster Fuller who said that that hyper specialization is the precursor, to the extinction of species, and
Yeah.
I think that it's a very valid thing for an individual to, cultivate and develop an expertise and, knowledge, understanding, authority, on a subject or a set of subjects, and I think it's also reasonable for them to, to experience, appropriate reward for their effort. But I don't think it's appropriate at all to, monopolize a given pursuit, certainly institutionally. And
Yeah.
and I think that any time that that's happened, we end up with, things like, Nazi movements forming, because
Yeah.
what it usually gets down to is, I mean, like most people have, the general public is aware of this, but people that are in the sciences, whether they're in the mainstream or even in the alternative areas, if they're paying attention and if they're awake and aware, they know full well that part of the reason that there is such a complexity to the languaging of their discipline has to do with protectionism. I mean, Einstein himself said,
Hmm.
if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. And
Wow.
I know that it's a form of protectionism, and it's also a form of, collective control.
Segregation? I was
Absolutely,
gonna say.
absolutely.
Wow,
And
I never, yeah. Now that you bring that up, I'm like, oh yeah, yeah,
sure,
you're right. You're
hmm
right. Because even being a teacher, I feel that, you can explain just about anything to children if you put it simply
sure,
and in a way that they can understand. They might not have the terminology for certain things, but you can get a concept across, you know, um,
yeah,
pretty easily if you're careful, not careful, but if you're, I guess maybe careful about the words that you choose.
hmm
Wow, that's really, I'm glad you brought that up. That's really, yeah, it was a really, really good point. Um, so, have you, I guess you kind of answered. I was going to ask you, what are your thoughts on a modern day science and conventional science, and where do you see it going?
I see it going. I'd say the current momentum that's in place as it stands right now, I see it going towards a very destructive and a very degenerative, uh, you know, horizon point. I think that there are some areas of the sciences that hold a lot of hope, and I think that there's a small number of individuals, small number of groups that are in place right now that are sort of carrying the torch and that they're making an effort, and there may be some great potential good that comes out of that. But there was a movie that came out um, over 10 years ago, and it was a remake of what was it called? Leonard Nimoy, I think, was the producer, and he actually starred as a
Oh, Brave New World?
Brave New World.
Yeah.
And he said there's this quote in there where they're interviewing the savage, the noble savage that they brought in. They're talking to him, and they're
Yeah.
also talking to the main character, male character that lives in the urban environment, and they're having this little kind of like powwow coffee, and the master directors, the guy that's running the show of this complex, city environment, and the master director is saying, well, we had to do away with art, and we had to do away with science, and we had to do
I
away with,
remember that.
sure, we had to get rid of history.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
they're kind of surprised by this. Even the guy that's the male lead character that is in the urban environment, he asks the master director, he said, well, how can you say that we don't follow science? I said, I thought our advanced future society was all about science. And so Leonard Nimoy, the master director, just kind of laughs. He goes, oh, no, not real science, only technology that serves the public order.
Hmm.
So I think that what would be found is that much of the science that passes today as science, both in the corporate environments and also in academia, it's not science generally. It's technology that
Yeah.
serves a public order that has a very specific agenda in place. And that agenda it is definitely not the liberation of humanity as a species. The
Yeah.
agenda is
The
is
opposite, the enslavement of humanity as a species, or either the extinction of humanity as a species. I
it's
would say. I mean,
sure
would you?
it's processing.
Yeah.
It has
Yeah.
to do with how do we get the most out of the commodification of humanity. That's it.
Wow.
Humanity as a commodity, whatever technology serves the commodification and the harvesting of that commodity better. This is where the money goes to support that kind of science. So I don't see it going anywhere terribly good. Most of the great scientists of the last 100 years that I'm aware of were persecuted. They were never rewarded reasonably well, or at least not usually rewarded very well. And
Yeah.
they usually had to experience a great deal of resistance and hardship, uh, to get any of their findings out there. So,
Yeah.
it's interesting because even with Wilhelm Reich, uh, after they,
Wait, is this the guy at the Oregon Energy?
yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's on record that after they, basically charged him and arrested him, when he was in jail, you know, um, on charges of practicing basically, phony science.
Mm.
The government came to him while he was in prison and told him that they wanted him to use his discoveries to develop technology for their exclusive use. And if you do a search on just one of the areas, one of the things that was produced from his unique discoveries was a device called radiosondes, and that's spelled Radiosonde, and that's on public record. And that's a device that was constructed solely from his discoveries, and it was used for a number of things, one of which was weather modification by the government. So this is what
Oh,
happens.
yeah,
So
yeah,
he's publicly ridiculed,
yeah.
he's publicly destroyed, and then when he has no options left, he is forced by duress to work for them. So
That's
yeah,
terrible.
I don't really see science as it is right now going any place meaningful.
Um, do you believe that we're all here by random chance, or do you think, especially dealing, I want to like to know your point of view as a scientific researcher. Do you feel that there's a higher intelligence in the universe, or it's just all random?
Um, I think that uh, what we refer to as randomicity or randomness is largely a fallacy. I'm not saying that you know random processes don't exist, within a certain degree of how we, within a certain degree of contemporary definition. But I think a lot of what we're told is the nature of randomness is not really true. Um, and I think that I'm quite convinced that there's hard physical evidence, again, across multiple vectors of a higher intelligence. Like I've seen it. I've viewed it firsthand. I know that to be true. Um, and it's there are certainly arenas a person can enter to debate the veracity of what I've just said.
Hmm.
But I think that those arenas are largely constructs that also serve various agendas. I don't think that they're dealing with what is an objective truth. And I know that there are a lot of people that will say things like absolute truth does not exist, or objective reality does not exist. But I think that that is purely a function of a coping mechanism, for a person's chosen worldview or paradigm. I don't think it has anything to do with the reality of things, and I think that there's also lots of evidence for that. Yeah. So I do think there's a
So,
higher intelligence, and I do think that there is something that passes for randomness, but I also think that there is, really, really quickly, I think that there is a segment of humanity that is present in this, what we call this reality, for a reason.
interesting. Do you consider your work scientific or spiritual or both or something else? What do you?
Well, I mean, I've loved the sciences since I was young, um, and my opinion is that that my work is mainly scientific because it's been derived through scientific process. You know, but there were certainly inputs I that were of an unusual nature that I don't know exactly how to define. That I don't know if I could uh, say with 100% confidence that they were necessarily scientific. So some of the inputs were outside of my ability to define scope-wise. But as far as the compilation and the construction and the developments and then the end result, I would say that this is largely scientific. I can tell you a story. Um,
Yeah, tell me a story.
well,
I'm down for stories.
okay. Uh, One of my greatest teachers and mentors was a professor from Stanford, and his background was mainly in astrophysics. And we, were in contact for a number of years, and our arrangement was one of private tutorship. And I paid him a good chunk of money, but also we were also friends. We evolved into friendship. And he taught me about a number of different things. But one time he told me a story, and he also got involved with various very obscure branches of esoterica, and he got involved with heliocentric. It's called heliocentric astrology, and